for a program called Gear Up. And Benita was connected with that program as she was the accountant for that program. And so my role was to collect and analyze data about how well the program was doing. And so I did that, I think, for about 4 years, because it was a longitudinal program. Benita stepped in actually to save the program from some accounting practices that were not good. And she did it successfully. So I know that Benita comes from a successful career background, but it still makes Launch Code worth it. It's still worth it, no matter what your background is, because Launch Code teaches some skills and opens the door for opportunities that really make it possible to change your entire career. So after having years of data analysis experience and being over large information systems for school districts and for public policy, I wanted to really bring those skills along with me into my new career, and I've been able to do that with the opportunity that I got with MasterCard. So when I started at MasterCard as an apprentice, I started in a department that basically tests functionality of credit card bins for customers. And when I say customers, I mean banks and financial institutions, not down to the user level of the card holder, but the financial institution that issues those cards. And we were responsible for doing lots of testing to make sure the functionality was right. So for instance, if on your credit card, those first 6 numbers are what's called the bin, and the bin has been pre-configured to allow certain kinds of transactions, to disallow certain kinds of transactions, etc. There is so much detail that goes into configuring those bins that it requires lots and lots of testing. And so that's where I started at MasterCard. And when I interviewed for that position, I felt, of all the interviews I had done, I felt it was my worst. But the person who interviewed me felt that I was the best. And part of the reason is because they had met someone from Launch Code and had lots of confidence in Launch Code. And throughout my interview, the things that I was saying and the experience that I was sharing, they felt that I was the perfect fit. And so when I started that role, normally the apprenticeships are 6 months to a year. And so I was plugging away, learning everything I could learn. I landed on the best team I think you could land on at MasterCard. And that's what everybody was telling me. You have the best supervisor here, and et cetera. And I really had a wonderful manager. But through all of I just became a sponge, learning everything I could learn about testing for MasterCard. And I did not know that I was learning ahead of the curve. It didn't feel that way to me. In my experience, in my day-to-day experience, I felt I was trying to just catch up and stay abreast of everything I was learning. And so about 4 months into my apprenticeship, my supervisor says, I already knew what I was going to do after the first month. I can't wait to hire you. I've already put in the paperwork. Well, that was just before we started quarantining because of coronavirus. So I was at home working remotely, waiting to hear when that had been finalized. And I just began to think, well, everything is slowed up a bit because of coronavirus. And then found out that I had been hired kind of out from under him for a different department, a completely different role. So I started my learning process all over again for a different role, But I again landed with such a wonderful team of people that it is still a very rewarding and great experience to be working for MasterCard. So one thing that I know MasterCard and other employers look for is people who are willing to continue learning, because in technology we know that it's constantly changing. So as much as we learn, we have as much to continue learning. So as an apprentice in the different roles that you'll land through Launch Code, you'll bring along, of course, what you've learned, the wonderful training that you're getting, but you come with the attitude of being willing to learn the specifics to that role. And when your willingness to learn is observed, you find that you are in the right place, and the people who you're working with are very glad to have you.
Well, and just for everybody else to add a little bit of context there, Tracy, Mike may have said this to you. I don't know if he has before, but MasterCard, I don't know who exactly it was, but they came to us and they were looking for a couple new people, and they were like, just give us someone who likes to learn as much as Tracy does. And we're like, we'll send out the survey. We'll try and find that. But I would say, so question, because we have a couple ones in the chat. Do you, in being a sponge and kind of like in trying to pick up as much as possible, what have been some like actual things that you've tried to do to make sure that you can learn more than just like directly the role? Like, have you started doing any certificates? Have you, like, what is that process of picking up that information?
Actually, I have. So depending on what your role is as an apprentice, there can be a lot to learn in addition to what you bring from Launch Code, or you can continue with the flow of what you've already learned from Launch Code and just continue to evolve that way. When I started working in what's called the PTS department doing the testing, MasterCard actually has a long array of training opportunities for you to take while you are an apprentice. And I began to do that. I began to take trainings and complete trainings, get certificates for different types of training. And most of those were directly related to MasterCard. However, some of those are financial technology in general, because that's what MasterCard considers itself to be. Not a credit card company, but a financial technology company. So I started digging into that technology. What is financial technology? What can I add to what I know? And as I began to do that, I found myself working my way back to something that I had learned at MasterCard, which is APIs. Has anybody been introduced to APIs?
That might have just been what today's lecture was about. Just maybe.
Really? Well, it's very interesting because I had been introduced to APIs through Launch Code, and then in my new role in U.S. product delivery, I went through another API training and got a second certificate. And what I'm learning is that a lot of the companies, a lot of the customers to MasterCard, rather than starting from scratch to build their own programs, they want to be able to plug in to what already exists through MasterCard's technology, and they're doing that through APIs. So it's becoming more and more popular applications that people can tap into that way, companies and clients can tap into that way. So it just turned out to be a really great connection. What I started off with at Launch Code, learning APIs, and what I'm doing now, using that same application technology. So as much as you can to branch out and add to your learning and just keep going, keep doing it is the right attitude to have.
Awesome. Then a question in the chat. So during liftoff, was MasterCard your only offer or was it your preference?
MasterCard was my preference. I had gone on, well, let me say that differently. MasterCard was my only offer. It was the offer I was hoping for, though. So I had interviewed with Boeing, I interviewed with Merritt's, and I interviewed with MasterCard. And Mike was doing such a tremendous job getting interviews for me that literally the week I interviewed with MasterCard, I had had an interview with Merritt's, I think on a Monday. And then that Thursday, I had, an interview with Merritt's. And then I had an interview with Boeing at like 8:30 Thursday morning, and an interview with MasterCard, and then an interview with Boeing at about 8:30 that morning. So in order to be on time for my second interview, I literally went and sat, because these were on the same day. I sat in the lobby on the telephone to finish my telephone interview, and then stepped up to the receptionist to let her know I was there and available for my in-person interview for the other company. It was the only way to get them both in at the same time without being late for either one. And so that was the as I said, the interview I felt I had done the worst with, but it turned out to be the best interview with MasterCard. That's the one I really wanted. And thankfully, that's the one that I was selected for.
So the takeaway for students is to just schedule 6 interviews in a day back to back, so you're all just on.
So
Another question was, in what ways has your background in education influenced how you navigated your career change into tech?
Well, it kind of gave me the fortitude to keep learning, because for one thing, as an educator, you have to keep learning in order to teach other people. Almost nothing stays the same. So while I was teaching, I was also a sponge to just continue learning. And I think as an educator, it just kind of gave me the courage to keep learning more so that I could continue to evolve myself, of course, because you don't want someone to stand in front of you and teach who does not have the fortitude to learn. And so that attitude just helped me have the confidence to keep learning. And it kind of made me able, I would say, to dig in and learn something new with Launch Code. And honestly, as I look backwards, I had a good aptitude for technology very early in my career. And it came pretty easy for me to learn technology early in my career, but I felt I needed some degrees. So I went to school and I actually went and got 2 master's degrees and actually started working on a doctorate, and found myself going full circle back to technology. And that is where I think I should have stayed in the first place.
And then another question is, in tech, how useful do you find your memory in learning techniques? Or is it much more just about knowing where to find the knowledge?
It's both. I would say it's a combination of both. So there are, of course, skills and learning that you're getting through Launch Code that are going to give you some, they're kind of opening you to the different horizons in technology, of course, but it's a continual learning process. And so what you don't know, you develop the aptitude for finding what you need through research, through other programs. There are some wonderful online programs that you can use to just keep up with your knowledge and keep learning new things. But it's a combination of both. The quest to keep learning technology is what just kind of helps you to keep moving forward and to stay successful in the field.
And then pre-COVID, how accessible do you think it was to work from an at-home position?
You
And
said what did you say?
How accessible was it to work from home or to find a work from home position? And on this one too, I'll add kind of the launch code side of things too.
Well, I felt very fortunate that I had started the apprenticeship with MasterCard, and that I was having the opportunity to work from home. Because in other fields, that opportunity to work from home has not been as readily available as it is for people in technology. So it was a blessing. The timing was such a blessing, because in other fields, it would not have been nearly as easy to keep a job, honestly. And I will say, in between, so while I was finishing up Liftoff, I took a position working for a homeless shelter, actually, helping people research and find housing who were living in the shelter. And I was making a lot of different connections in the community, and I felt good about what I was doing because I was helping people. It honestly was not paying me enough to keep bills paid the way I needed to, because unfortunately, helping positions are not always the best paying positions. But also, I was kind of relieved that I was not, once COVID started, I was not in a position where I was nearly as exposed. Because working in that environment, I would have been very much exposed to the virus, unfortunately. So being able to work from home has been much, much better.
And on our side of things too, what we used to tell all the students is that it's almost impossible to get one of our apprenticeships to have it be work from home. And that was because largely that was the situation pre-COVID, where most of these companies, even though, and I'm sure I've already seen the chat, a lot of you are very enticed by stay-at-home positions. I mean, I think that may be why a lot of you even came to Launch Code and are interested in tech, just for the remote employment opportunities. And that largely is there, but I think before COVID, it was still almost all the employers we worked with just didn't have it set up in a way where entry level starting candidates could effectively work from home and get the level of support that they needed to really succeed at the role. So it was really pre-COVID almost unheard of, just for that exact reason. There just was not the support, and we, on our side too, we didn't want to put candidates in a position where they were fully remote and maybe they didn't have that direct manager that they could go to and ask a lot of those questions. And so since then, it has obviously kind of flipped completely, where it's now everything is remote. Almost everything. A couple places are in person, but almost everything is remote, and likely will be that way for a while, if not indefinitely. And I think the difference now that I've seen on a lot of the companies that we work with is there's been such a shift within their teams, where they're, for a while, even like a couple months ago, it was, let's just get through the next 2 months. But now the conversation really has shifted to, okay, we know we're going to have to find a way to train entry-level people coming in, because this may last for a long time. How do we actually do that? So there has been a big shift in the companies we work with, trying to figure out how they can mentor apprentices and any entry-level employees. But that has just been a very, very recent shift for us. and for everyone.
Mm-hmm. I would say, if I can add to that, Nick, that the amount of learning, the number of systems and programs and even computer screens that it took for me to start learning what I needed at MasterCard, it would have been very difficult for me starting off to be at home. I needed to be hands-on, face-to-face with my director and the whole team that I was working with in order to learn the job, honestly. Doing the kind of testing that we were doing, it would not have been possible really to do it from home at the onset. And when COVID first started, the quarantine first started, MasterCard, I would have to say, was very protective of its employees and immediately started to break people into teams. So you had Team A that could go into the building if they wanted in a particular week, but nobody else could go into the building. Team B could go in during their designated time, but nobody else could. And they actually programmed employee IDs so that if you were not on the team that was supposed to be there that particular week, your ID would not even let you in the building. That's how serious they were about protecting people. I happened to be on Team C at the time because some of the work that I was doing in testing required that I be in a ATM laboratory. Because for some of the financial institutions, the testing was directly related to how an ATM would respond to a new credit card. Would it be configured the way it's supposed to so that a withdrawal could be made, so that if it's out of the country, it would behave properly, etc. Well, so I had to have access to the building anytime I wanted. So I had to go into the building, but I was in a very secluded place because hardly anybody could get through the door that even led to the ATM laboratory. So it would have been impossible, actually, to get those things done had I been restricted from the building. However, as time went on, a few weeks into quarantine, those kinds of responsibilities, they just kind of became less and less frequent. And when I switched to the other team, my new supervisor was very quick to point out that it was not something that I needed to do in the new role. But so the timing really worked out well for being able to work from home. But if I had tried to do that from the outset, I would not have been able to learn the job.
Well, and Lisa just had a good point in the chat about you all will be old pros by the time you get to your apprenticeship about how to remotely learn. So you got a little bit more time to plan it, and so do the companies.
Yeah, and actually after this, your ability to work from home effectively will be a good point to make during your interview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to show to them, even in what you found has worked for like your interactions with TAs, where if there's been some interactions where you found that you can learn it quickly and you can set up things with your TAs to learn effectively remotely, and you bring up some of those ideas, that will be huge to say in some of those interviews, because that's what they're going to care about. They do want to see how you're going to be able to handle it if you don't have someone directly there helping.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you for having me.
To have you here. Yeah, great to have you talk to the class.
Thank you. You know, there is one point that I would like to make before I sign off, Nick, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, of course.
And that is that MasterCard is excited about launch code. And I'm sure other companies are too, because when you finish launch code, you have kind of proven your ability to learn something new that'll take you to a new place. And employers, even if you have not gone through a 4-year degree to get your technology education, your software development, your coding education, the fact that you have obtained it and that you can come to a new position and do well and continue to learn, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for learners. And MasterCard's experience with Launch Code has been really good. So they're looking to continue to build a relationship with Launch Code, and that's wonderful. Also, there was a senior vice president that I was talking with last week. She's very interested, excuse my door, it squeaks. She is very interested in having more launch coders come through the customer facing department, US product delivery. And one of the questions that she asked me is how much project management is taught in launch code. And so even though it is not a direct curriculum through launch code, I encourage you, as you're learning other things, as you are learning coding and all of the technology that you're being introduced to, I encourage you to just look into how you can apply project management to what you're learning. So we know that to be effective, you have to definitely be a team player, and you have to be able to work alongside other people to be effective in what you're doing, right? I also encourage you to pick up some project management skills along the way, because if MasterCard is asked that question, perhaps some others will be looking for the same thing.
Absolutely.
That's my 2 cents.
That's a great 2 cents. Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
To everybody.
Yeah. We'll stay in touch. I'll see you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So for everyone else, we're gonna do a real quick activity that actually ties into exactly what we were just talking about, and I think one that a lot of you will have some interest in. So I'm gonna start by I want to ask first, and you can just like post your answer in the chat in some way after I ask the question, but. In your studying, so think of like the last week of you studying the material and you going through some of the recent chapters, and then maybe or maybe not doing the exercises and then doing the studios. Think of if this has ever happened to you. So you spend a ton of time working your way through the reading. You might spend hours, you might take super detailed notes, you might like basically rewrite the book. And then you get to the exercises, if you attempt them, or you get to studios if you didn't attempt the exercises, and you feel like you haven't even seen anything like this before. Like you feel like you didn't even read or spend any time on the chapter at all, because you're just like, I have no idea anything that is happening right now. Yeah, post whatever versions of this. Yeah, okay, great. So I would say this could be like, this should be like our talk for like every single class. And I feel like now is a good time, but I've talked to so many students, especially in this class in the last like week, where I feel like this has just come up very strongly. And I think part of this might be because of remote learning too. So how to do this material, how to learn. And obviously it's gonna be very different for everyone. There's no one size fits all, but I wanna start by just even giving you an example, and then I'll give you some items over the next week for you all to do, so you can start to think of it for yourself. But an example of what I did, and then what I've worked with some students to do over the last couple of weeks, and we'll start with that, and then we'll kind of go more to the action parts of it. So almost, and I think this goes very similar into what Tracy was saying, but then also Corinthian, I think your comment about, there's the question about memory, like how does memory play a role in coding, and like how important is that? Is it do you have to remember all the information, or do you just have to be able to find that? And so many people I talked to said the same thing, where it's like, I just wish my memory was better. And I've been in that case so many times where I'm like, if I could just remember everything, it'd be amazing. what we've talked about and what I found is so much of coding is such a different style of learning. It's such a different thing than that so many people are not used to, where when you're reading that material, you are picking it up, but you're still going to feel like you've never seen it if you attempt the exercise at the end, because it's a very different, there's the problem solving aspects of it, which are one thing, and then there's just the reading and kind of the memorization, the stuff that you'd be much more used to. But so much of coding is not memorization, and it's not that type of learning. And so what we've seen and what worked for me and some of the students is, if you know that you have, let's say, 2 hours or some arbitrary amount of time where you've never seen the chapter before, you've never even attempted it, start with the exercise. Go to the very first exercise and just attempt it. Just take 10 minutes. You won't know any single thing about it, but attempt it and try to get an idea of even just see if you can figure out one small part of the answer. Because what that'll do is that'll kind of shift your thinking into more of that problem solving. And then, just so you know, we've built the book so that every single exercise teaches you one of the core things that we were wanting you to pick up in the chapter. So if you can finish all the exercises, you can have full faith that you've gotten out of that chapter what you should have gotten out of that chapter. Because I think that's what a lot of other people have had issues with, is they're like, I don't know what I need to know. It's so much information. What do I focus on? If you can do all the exercises, you're golden. So start with the exercises and then just go back to the part in the chapter that exercise that will help you solve that one exercise. So break it down so much narrower, where you're not just reading, you're not taking detailed notes, but you're going to the one part in the book that's going to give you the information that you need to finish that exercise. And a lot of times it's going to be a little ambiguous. Like, there's not like do sections 2.2 through 2.4 for this exercise, but you'll start to figure it out. You'll figure out what parts of the book are going to help you finish that exercise, and then go for that. So I would recommend starting with that this week, trying it out, seeing if it works for you. But then the two takeaways, and I'll post this in announcements because I know it's a lot of information. The two biggest takeaways for you to be doing is, now is the point in the class where you need to be thinking about what you can be doing better to learn this material. And it's not more time. Most people that I talk to are like, oh, if I only had 5 more hours a week to devote to it, I'd be so fine. And the reality is, like, that probably won't happen unless something major in your life changes. You might not get any more time for this. So let's see if we can shift it to take the same amount of time you're already putting into it and just make it a little bit more effective. So what I want you to do is try out this method, or one that you've used before, or something that you can think of. You can do some research to find your own little method, but then make a note to yourself of what that method's going to be. Write it out, write out your game plan, do a little strategy. And then what I want you to do is, as you're studying, just be aware of what's working and what's not working, and make little notes. Like, if you start on that exercise and then you go back to the part in the book, let's say you don't find the part in the book that exercise that helps you solve that exercise, make the note, say like, hey, this didn't work for me at all, and then say why. And what it'll start to do is it's going to shift you to thinking a lot more about what your process is, instead of just doing the same thing week after week. And that is the best thing you could possibly be doing, because one, it's going to help you stay in the class, hopefully, and help you really succeed in the class. But then two, that's the stuff that employers love to hear. They, as Tracy was saying, like, they want to see what you did to learn this material, and what you did to set up your own process to make sure you were picking it up. So let's plan on that this week. I'll make an announcement in the channel to kind of give a little summary of all that. But let's hopefully that will, even if it saves you 15 minutes, that's an improvement that is very worth making. So let's plan for that, and we'll see you all next week, and I'll hear the updates.
Nick, can I add one thing too?
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, obviously Nick, 100% spot on, and that's awesome. And I just want to add, because I see like a lot of, just to all these comments and chats, I see a lot of people talking about like, oh, I had to look up, like I saw one person say they had to look up what type of was from the very first chapter of working in LC 101. And I just want to add that I feel like from my own experience in LC 101, it can get so easy to add mental weight as you're learning new concepts and feeling like you're not totally grounded in the earlier ones. And I just want to say that it's always it's okay and recommended and necessary in this career to let go of that weight, because there's nothing wrong with having to refer back to your book for something that you don't know off the back of your hand, and that's something you'll do for the rest of your career as a senior dev. You'll have your internet web page up while you're writing your code for your $1 million app for whatever company. I mean, that's reality. And I see so many students that are like, oh my gosh, I don't remember this. And I know from my own experience, if you let that mental weight add to like the things that you don't know, and you let that weight get out of hand, you're not being fair to yourself, And it's I highly recommend just taking a breather and letting go of feeling like that is a necessity, when in fact you have the access to the tools to not have to worry about that. So don't let that worry get you down.
100%. We last year for one of the classes, you're very close. I think we haven't started TypeScript, have we? Jade?
No.
Right.
Almost. I think it's in a couple, maybe next week.
At the end of the class, so at the end of Unit 2, I had everybody raise their hand for who felt comfortable doing TypeScript in an interview, and not a single hand went up. So like, just know there are parts of this unit and parts of this entire class where you won't feel comfortable at all going into an interview. That's why we have Liftoff. That's why we have this other program that's going to help you do some of like the actual technical interviews. For now, the focus is just finding what structure works for you, trusting that you are learning the material, even if you feel like you don't remember it. If you're doing exercises, if you're doing the assignments, you should have full faith that you're picking up what you need to pick up.
And I see so many TAs in here, I mean, just reach out. I see so many questions like, oh, I don't feel great about this and this. Like, I just want to reaffirm, we're your best friends too, just like all the fun friends we had in our coding today. That, we want to help you, but we can't help you if you don't tell us that you need help, So we love to help. So always feel comfortable reaching out to any of us to help you guys with anything that you need.
Love it. On that note, we'll dive into the studio and get all the help you can get.
Yep.
So everybody can break, and we'll come back. Jade, you said you're doing your thing at 8?
Yeah, let's do it at 8.
Perfect. So we'll come back here at 8 if you have interest. See you all.